It's time for another blistering report from the front lines of the cultural war for a constitutional America. And now, here's your host, Charles Benninghoff.
70 globalist leaders, including Secretary of State John Swiftboat Kerry, are all headed to Paris on January 15th to try to behead Israel like an ISIS prisoner of war and give its carcass away to the 57 Muslim nations that control the UN through sheer numbers. Just wait until you hear the demands that the Muslim dictators hope to force Israel to comply with in this meeting. And with the assistance of Mr. Kerry, Swiftboat John Kerry. In response, Republican Congressman Louie Gohmert of Texas has introduced the strongest bill yet to completely gut the United Nations of all U.S. taxpayer funding. Well, if they're beheading Israel, we can gut them, right? I'll tell you how and why you should support Gohmert's bill, which is called H.R. 373, that withdraws all voluntary as well as assessed U.S. payments forced to be paid to the UN, so stay tuned. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you want to receive these daily updates on our network's news and action campaigns. Now, I have to do a bit of a recap of the events before I talk about this Paris meeting, so you can put what's going to go on in Paris in some kind of perspective. First, we have to go back to 1967. I know, that's a long time ago, but hey, it's really important to this issue. In 67, there was a so-called Six-Day War. The Muslim nations attacked Israel. There was a bunch of them. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, with the help from some other Muslim nations, and all these Arabs and these Muslims, despite their best efforts, couldn't beat these little tiny nations and groups of Jews called Israel. Can you believe that? All these countries came in and they tried to knock out and kill off all the Jews. They wanted to decimate these people. They wanted to cut their heads off and stuff them up one of those John cannons. It was to blow them out into orbit. That's what they wanted to do. But you know what? They didn't succeed. And in the process, Israel won. Knocked off all these Arab tanks, knocked out the Russian jets out of the skies that were flown by the Arabs. In fact, a lot of those Arab jets weren't even actually flown by Arabs. They were flown by communist Russian pilots. And even so, Israel knocked them out of the sky and won the war. And as so often happens in war, the victorious side, in this case Israel, captured new territory. Since the Six-Day War, Israel has been the legitimate owner of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Wailing Wall, and the Temple Mount. And they took this property away from the Arabs for a good reason: provide a buffer against future attacks. Wouldn't you do the same? And wouldn't you fight to keep that property to make sure that you didn't get attacked again by a huge number of Arabs surrounding you? Well, Israel won. They occupied the territory, and they haven't left that territory for 50 years. Despite repeated terrorist attacks from the Muslim world, Israel has kept this occupied territory peaceful, prosperous, and equally accessible to both Jew and Muslim, something the Muslims surely won't do. In December of 2016, you may remember, the UN Security Council voted to condemn Israel for occupying that territory and claiming that Israel is in violation of international law. Now, if there was any fairness whatsoever in the United Nations, that proposal would never have come up. But the UN is controlled by these 57 Muslim nations, as I've said. And in the past, America has always used its veto power on the UN Security Council to shoot down these stupid resolutions. And believe me, this is monumentally stupid. But Obama, the Muslim that he is, chose not to veto UN Resolution 2334 that was the condemnation of Israel. It was the first time in history that a U.S. president abandoned Israel to the wild-eyed Muslim dictators at the UN. If you're unaware, the largest voting bloc of countries in the UN is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC. This is an alliance of 56 Muslim countries, plus the Palestinian terrorists, and it is able to sway virtually any resolution in the UN. So the UN is effectively controlled by the OIC, which seeks to impose a worldwide Muslim government known as the Caliphate. They want the Caliphate to run the United States. They want it to run Europe. They want it to run the United Kingdom, and that's why they're trying to invade us. You know what? If you don't see the plot here, guys, something's wrong. Anyway, following up on the UN Resolution 2334, the stated reason that these 70 globalist leaders are headed to Paris is to advance the one-sided peace talks, peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians, who more often than not fill the role of terrorists and not statists. They're terrorists throwing missiles and bombs over the border at Israel. Do you follow that? That's what they're doing, and they're supposed to be representing a country, a so-called country. Well, the UN has declared Israel to be guilty of international war crimes, and now all of a sudden, the UN is going to force Israel to submit to the quote-unquote peace with the Palestinian terrorists. Hamas, come on home. Come on home, Hamas. Here's a list of the demands that the UN has for Israel in this meeting, which was published in an Israeli newspaper. First, the 70 nations will only recognize the pre-1967 borders. That way they can invade again. In other words, Israel will have to surrender territory it has owned for 50 years to comply with this UN mandate. Second, the group commits to two states, Israel and Palestine, and the two nations will, and I quote, live side by side in peace and security, end quote. And finally, the group of globalists will demand that Israel publicly renounce any of its elected officials who do not support a two-state solution. Oh, so you don't have freedom of speech anymore, huh, Jews? Well, I hope this resolution doesn't pass and get jammed down your throat, because if you don't like it, you're in sad shape. What this does, of course, is create a nation state out of the rabble that is now comprising the terrorist hotbed called Palestine. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that the Paris talks are rigged by the Muslims, and I have to agree. Here's why this is really dangerous for our only ally in the Middle East, Israel. After this meeting in Paris on the 15th, the UN and Obama will still have 5 days to kick around Israel before Donald Trump's swearing in. The list of demands I just read to you is the result of the meeting in Paris, which has not happened yet. So they've already gone to the point where they've got the agenda, and it's going to be a matter of fact. The meeting is simply a tourist visit to Paris and an eye by raising their hands. After the meeting, those results will be announced by the UN globalists. They have already decided in advance that they want to chop Israel up and give the bits and pieces to the Palestinians, just like an ISIS prisoner. So many intelligence experts suspect that the UN Security Council already has a secondary resolution written that it will announce and vote on the next week. And guess what? Obama will not veto it. He won't do it. So this will be laying a huge trap for our Jewish allies. That is why we need to demand rapid action from Congress to take extraordinary actions against the UN. Congressman Louie Gohmert has stepped in to lead on this issue, and he has introduced this Bill 373. I'll let him explain two major things that this bill does. Take a look. Listen up.
Two things. One, we don't give a dime to the UN until they rescind that resolution. And people are saying, oh, they'll never do that. Fine. They don't need our help to be anti-Semitic. And then the other is to prevent even one dime, making it a crime to use any government money to recognize Palestine as an independent country or state.
So there you have it. If you've watched my YouTube channel for a while, you probably remember that we're supporting an earlier bill that would have cut voluntary payments to the UN. Those voluntary payments fund things like the UN Green Climate Fund and other UN agencies. But Gohmert's bill cuts the voluntary funding and the assessed funding to the UN, and it will gut the UN. This means the UN would not receive its annual membership dues for the United States, which is paid for by your tax dollars. Because of the accounting practices of the federal government and the UN, no one, not even the government, knows actually how much taxpayer money the UN receives each year. It's estimated to be about $8 billion by the insiders, but I suspect it is much, much more. Not only that, but America contributes more money to the UN than 175 other nations combined. It's time to cut off the UN completely. That's what Louie Gohmert's bill does. It completely ceases all funding to the UN. That's why we need to support it. We need to flood Congress with personalized letters and phone calls right now. If you go to our action page, you'll see your personalized letter and you'll see phone number that you can call to tell your congressman and your senator exactly what you think of this horrible mess. We need your help to do this. So please go to our action page today and add your voice to the chorus of American patriots demanding that our tax dollars no longer fund the UN. Bob Mallory has directions on the next screen to tell you how to find your action page, so stay tuned. This is Charles Benninghoff signing off and wishing you freedom, fulfillment, and God's many blessings.
Demand that Congress pass Louie Gohmert's bill to completely defund the UN. If you're watching this on our action page on our website, use the form next to the video screen to select a program. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, just click the icon appearing now to find a link to our action page, or check the video's description to find the link. Speak out today.